Hey, welcome to another episode of the Playing in the Sandbox podcast, where we are deeply committed to inspiring action in today's leaders. And today we're going to be talking all about rules of engagement of a healthy team. Yes, what are the rules of engagement for a healthy team? Well, it starts with stepping into the sandbox and looking at what are the behaviors and the characters I'm going to introduce you to today in the sandbox. You know, we all learned these tools and skills as kids on how to play well on the playground together or how to play well in the sandbox together. And somehow when we became adults in the workplace, we lost it. We lost those skills. We checked them at the door or we brought the bad behaviors with us into the workplace. And it's our opportunity as leaders to create healthy rules of engagement for the team to be healthy and thrive. Been looking forward to sharing this conversation with you today. So you're going to want to head on over to tammyjbond.com/podcast. Click on this episode so you can get your copy of the action plan, because this episode goes through a lot of content fast. And you're going to want that copy of the action plan so that you can have the questions to ask your team and you can have some of the tools outlined for you right there on how to set up healthy rules of engagement for your healthy team. Now get your pen and paper ready. Let's step into the sandbox and let's get going. All right, let's dive in to the sandbox and talk all about the rules of engagement of healthy teams. Yes. I'm guessing you don't have a healthy team. I said it out loud. And it's okay. It's just going to stay between you and me, friends. Like, we're not going to advertise it to the general public. But you probably don't if you don't have clear rules of engagement that everybody knows and everybody follows. Now, that's kind of bold to say. And you might be thinking, oh, yeah, Tam, we've got rules of engagement. We understand what respect means. And we're adults here. We know how. It's my favorite one. We're all adults. We know how to get along. Really? But do you? And do you have healthy rules of engagement when it comes to when we are getting along? But also, what about when we identify that we're not getting along in the team? What about when we're finding that we have an attitude or a behavior on a team that's destructive to us, right? What happens then? And how do you navigate it then? And I will tell you this, my friend, if you don't have rules of engagement established, when those issues come up, you're not going to know how to handle it. And it's going to wreak havoc across your team and potentially your company. High rates of turnover, sure. People taking a lot of sick days or showing up late for work, yes. But there's other behaviors that I think are just as destructive, and if not more so. And we're going to talk about those today because they're the rules of engagement for healthy teams and in the sandbox, right? Yeah, you heard me. Listen, one of the favorite questions that I ask when I go out and I engage with in a conversation with a leader who's having challenges with their teams, I say, well, listen, tell me what's the one thing that if I could fix anything, what's the one thing, what's your biggest challenge that you want me to come in and help you fix? And they will often say communication, it's an issue. They will say we're not performing and we're not meeting our numbers that we need to be meeting. They will say, gosh, there's a lot of infighting going on and I can't quite figure out how to navigate it. They will often say things like, you know what, everybody's working in their silos and we are way less efficient than we need to be. I don't know how to do that. I've also heard people say, we don't actually have a strategic plan. So we need help planning our direction and our path for growth. So when I ask that question, I get the same, it's like push repeat because it's the same question and it's been the same question, getting the same answers for years. I always love it when people tell me, oh, communication is our biggest issue. And it's the one area that we can actually fix the easiest. I said it, but it's the one area we spend the least amount of time on. And yet it's our biggest number one issue. And it usually is. It's how we communicate. It's the said heard of communication. It's the attitudes attached to the interpretation, right, of communication. It's the lack of communication that's probably the biggest piece. Or I'll say it this way. It's communicating from a perspective of your view from your chair, not considering the other person's view and the other person's needs. So communication's coming in, I've talked about it a lot. I'll continue to talk about it. But today for your rules of engagement with for a healthy team, I want to talk about the rules of the sandbox. I want to talk about them because I wrote about them and published it in my book 10 years ago. I've talked about it a lot. And we're going to introduce you to the characters of the sandbox today so you can get to know these behaviors really well as you're establishing your own rules of engagement for your own healthy team. So let's start out with our rules. You ready to go? All right, get your pen and paper because this is going to be important. Rule number 1 of the sandbox is don't throw sand. You know the person. I call him Johnny the Sand Thrower. Yes, I've named them. Johnny the Sand Thrower is the person that comes up into the sandbox. And when you were a kid, right? Just go back to when you were a kid playing in the sandbox, right? And they're the ones, or you can equate it even to they came onto the playground, right? And you knew that kid because everybody had that moment of groan because everybody knew that someone was probably going to go home crying. Someone was going to get hurt. Someone was going to be disrespected. Someone was going to have sand thrown in their face, right? It's the name calling in the adult workplace today. It's the avoidant behavior in the workplace today. As kids, little kids would come into the sandbox, and we had a Johnny the Sand Thrower as a kid in our neighborhood, and he would come in and he was mean. He would throw sand at everybody just to get attention. He was an attention seeker, right? And when you have that attention seeker that's there to just simply like, I want everybody to pay attention to me. As an adult in the workplace, someone that's an attention seeker or a sand thrower is an individual who's going to come across most likely as being very brazen in their approach, not shy about it at all. And they're going to come in and they're going to land with a word or land with a statement and tell you you're wrong and turn around and storm out of the room. They just threw sand in your face and now they're leaving and they're waiting for you to clean it up because they're not going to clean it up. Right? So don't throw sand. Rule number 1. We're going to talk about how not to do that or how to correct that behavior. But let's talk about rule number 2. Don't steal the shovels. Shovels are very important in the sandbox, right? They're a key instrument to being able to fill the buckets and to carve out your structure that you're making, this great castle that you're building in the sandbox. In your teams, the shovels are the tools that people are using, right, to be able to be effective and efficient with their job. So we want to make sure that no one's coming in to be a Susie the shovel stealer and take everybody's shovels so they can't complete a specific task. Because at the end of it, in my perspective, Susie shovel stealers are the selfish ones in the sandbox. They're the selfish ones in your workplace that want to take those tools just for them, not share them. They're going to stay in their silo. I'm not coming out of my silo. I'm not hollering across the cubicle wall to tell you what I need or to ask for help or to offer my help. I'm actually going to take all the the shovels, that one key tool that's needed so you can't do your job. And I'm going to be really happy about it because I'm holding all the shovels in the workplace. And then you have rule number 3, don't knock over someone else's castle, right? Don't be Nick the castle kicker. Yep. That's the person that comes in, storms in, kicks over everybody's creation, and then sits down and says, so what are you going to do to fix it? And everybody's looking because they're grieving that the creation that they just spent all that time in the sandbox building, Nick just came in and kicked it over and sat down in the middle of it, being very bullish or bullyish. And we have them in the workplace. We have Nick the castle kicker in the workplace. And I might be going over your Johnny the sand thrower and Susie the shovel stealer and Nick the castle kicker and these first 3 rules. And you can already identify who in your workplace have these personality types. Rules of engagement are to understand what we're not going to do. We're not going to throw sand in each other through threats or through disrespectful conversations, right? If I was just talking with a leader the other day about this as a really good one, going back to rule number 1, and don't throw sand. That can look like this in an adult team today. We can talk about somebody who's not in the room and say, well, this team member, they did this and they didn't finish that and they're not doing the job they're supposed to be doing. Well, great that you're mentioning that and bringing that to light in the team, with the team in the room. But if you're not going back to the person, you're no different than that sand throw. You're throwing sand in that moment. And what you want to do, a healthy rule of engagement, is it's fine to talk about someone as an issue or a behavior as an issue, but then come up with your plan to correct, go back and talk about it with the individual. Your by when you're going to have that conversation. It's super important. So not throwing sand means I'm actually not going to do it myself. If I see somebody throwing sand, I'm going to hold them up and reflect the mirror and say, stop. We don't do that here. What do you need instead? We don't need to act that way. We don't need to speak to one another that way. Let's choose to be different. Let's create rules of engagement for how we have those difficult conversations. Because the shovel stealers and the Nick the Castle kickers, they're there to be selfish and bullyish, and all of it's about attention grabbing because something is not being met for them in the workplace. So we want to find out what that is. But first, then we also want to look at rule number 4, which is hoarding all of the tools. You're Harriet the hoarder, the one that holds the information and doesn't share key information that would help you and your project be successful. Right? Key details that would help you and your work get done on time and be completed efficiently, right? Harriet the hoarder, as a kid in the sandbox, was the one that would go and take, I need that shovel and I need that rake and I need that bucket, and I'm not going to let you have that trowel because I need to use all of them. And they would take all of the tools of the sandbox and keep them and like protect them in some way. And as adults now, you've got Harriet the hoarder that's doing the same thing. But they're doing it with the information holdback. They might have been at a meeting where something key, some bit of key information was shared, and her or his responsibility is to come back to you as the leader and share that. But see, if they don't and they hoard that information, they're the ones that can either try to solve it or just be that one that feels that they're in control because they have something you don't have. And that is a very destructive behavior pattern to have on a team today. It's not a healthy rule of engagement. What it is, it's destructive, right? It's very destructive. So we want to get rid of Harriet the hoarders. And since I wrote my book in 2013, 10 years, can hardly believe it, I actually have added another character to the sandbox. And so this goes with my honorary rule number 5. Honorary rule number 5 has been in the book, which it actually came from a speaking engagement that I did many years ago. And I asked the questions about what were the rules of your sandbox? And you'd hear people say, don't throw sand, don't steal the shovels, right? Don't kick over somebody else's castle. All of these came from the questions that I asked. And one lady said, don't eat the sand. And I said, I'm sorry, what? She says, yeah, don't eat the sand. I said, what are you talking about? Don't eat the sand. She said, well, the neighborhood cat uses it as a litter box. So you don't eat the sand in the sandbox. So I have since, yes, it's true. That was said. And so it's honorary rule number 5, don't eat the sand. And it goes with my newest member of the sandbox, Dora the Destroyer. And she is quite a force to be reckoned with. These are the people that you might actually frame up as being something like, not that you're diagnosing, but you might give them a label of kind of narcissistic, right? They're really so self-indulgent and focused on themselves, and they will tell a story to you, and then they'll have a conversation with the person in the cubicle next to you, and it will be a little different version of the story, but it'll have you in the middle of it so that it gets you into trouble. Oh, they are destructive. And the interesting piece about the Dora the Destroyer is they are the individual that wants all the praise. They want to be applauded for having all of the ideas, working the most hours, coming up with all the creative solutions while everybody else was going to lunch. They stayed and worked, right? That is a destructive person on your team. And they make themselves the center of everybody's universe in the workplace, right? Rules of engagement for a Dora the Destroyer actually don't, I'm going to say this, they're difficult to implement with that personality type. I have keys and tools on how to implement with that person, but you've heard me say it before, slow to hire, quick to fire. When you identify that you have someone that is that destructive on the team, and you have those conversations about how you want to see their behaviors change and set that up, get somebody in there to have that 3-person conversation with Dora. You never want to go into a one-on-one with Dora because they will absolutely use every word that you said, twist it to their benefit, become the victim, and they'll use it in every conversation that they have outside of your office. So bring in a third party so you can have a conversation with Dora about their destructive behaviors. Set clear boundaries and ground rules with them of what you want to see. If not this, then what? Yeah. And then you give it a short timeline. Dora the Destroyer, more to come on her. She's something to contend with. But all of these people, whether you know you have a Johnny the Sand Thrower, you have a Susie the Shovel Stealer, you have a Nick the Castle Kicker, a Harriet the Hoarder, or I hope you don't, but if you do have a Dora the Destroyer, the rules of engagement that you set up are key on how you navigate it, right? Now I'm going to work backwards. With Dora, I already told you, you want to have a meeting with her. You want it to be at least yourself and another person. It doesn't even need to be HR necessarily. Could be you and another manager with Dora, right? It's key, though, that you have 3 people in that meeting, and it needs to be a visible meeting, not like out in public, but as much as possible, it needs to be visible. Because the one thing that I know with Dora the Destroyer, they don't like confrontation. They don't. Most of these personalities in the sandbox, they actually don't like confrontation. They will be bullyish and they will raise their voice and they will be destructive. But when you confront them at a behavior level, right? Because a rule of engagement is we're not throwing sand, right? We're not going to destroy people by gossiping about them. And we're not going to steal shovels. And we're not going to kick over other people's creations or hold all the tools so that people can't finish their own projects on time. You've got those clearly lined out that match your work environment. When someone is breaking one of those rules, you come back to, hold on a minute. Rule number 1 says we don't throw sand. And here's where we see that you were throwing sand. Help me understand what caused that, right? And help me understand what you need to put in place so that you stop that behavior. I guarantee, friend, it's actually just that simple. But if you don't actually set up what your rules of engagement are, then you can't actually hold people responsible for the behaviors and accountable for the behaviors that are showing up in the workplace. You know, I had an interesting experience with a group that I was working with that, you know, we had people like to give the, what do you call them? The platitudes, right? The niceties and, oh, we all get along well and we all get along great until, until something comes up that exposes maybe we aren't all, you know, singing from the same hymnal. Maybe we're all not moving in the same direction for the success of the team. Maybe we've got some issues. And the people that are the issues in the sandbox tend to get loud. And I witnessed this one individual, very loud, you know, very boisterous, very, you know, I can't believe that this is happening and this isn't fair. And the reality is, it was just like seeing one of those kids in the sandbox that I grew up with that was throwing sand or kicking over somebody's creation or going through and being really destructive and stomping through. See the difference between like a castle kicker that goes in and kicks the castle and then sits down. Dora the Destroyer is different than that. Dora the Destroyer will not only kick over the castle, but stomp around the whole sandbox so that everybody knows, you know, they're king of the mountain. And what's important, and that you can't, that the company would fall apart if they weren't here, that the backbone of the company is all in their office because they do all of the work, right? Those people. Yeah. I had an individual like that. I've encountered several individuals actually like that, which is why Dora the Destroyer is now hanging out in the sandbox with us. But the way that you approach those with your rules of engagement is to just consistently confront it. all of those behaviors, consistently confront it. Identify the behavior that's the issue, right? Identify what you want to see instead. If not this, then what? Put a plan in place with them. Co-create the plan. Here's one of the healthiest things that you can do as a leader to strengthen the health of your team. When you have an issue present, sit down with the individual and help them to create their own plan forward. Identify for them what you see, ask them what they see, identify what you'd like to see instead. But before you do that, ask them, what would you like to see instead? And then find that middle meeting place with them. It doesn't mean that it has to only be your way, leader. It can actually mean a both and. So how do we make it as a both and when we're navigating in the rules of engagement to change the behaviors of someone kicking over castles or stealing all the shovels? You know, I remember years ago, there was a gal, and she was like number 2 in charge. This was a long time ago, early on in my career. And she was number 2 in the organization that I worked within. And she had an extreme ego, but an extreme behavior pattern where whatever she was working on was the priority and nothing else anybody else was working on was a priority, that everything had to be dropped to help her with whatever her need was. And I remember I was getting something done. I worked for a state agency at the time, and I was getting a project done. And I'd stand at the printer. It's a long time ago. Needed to stand at the printer and make these copies because the governor's office, I was going into a meeting and the governor's office needed something. And this person came in and I need to use the copier right now. I said, well, I'm right in the middle of this. It'll be about 10 more minutes. I'm finishing up. No, you need to stop it now. I'm sorry, is the building on fire? Because what I'm working on is going for the governor. And this person, she looked at me and she said, excuse me. I said, what I'm working on is going to the governor. So if you would like to call the governor himself and let him know that we're going to be late getting this to him because I need to stop what I'm doing to this huge project I'm printing. You can't wait the 10 minutes till it's done. So I'm going to have to stop and then take it apart and reset it up, which is all going to take the same amount of time of just letting me finish it. And so I'm happy to have you call the governor to let him know, sorry, sir, but your project's going to be to your desk late. The carrier can't get it over to you because I need to copy something. This person looked at me and was just like so upset and huffing and puffing. Do you know who I am? I do know who you are. And called the person by name. And I said, and I'm happy to let the governor's office know that you take precedence over him. And the person turned around and walked away, very upset, and couldn't believe that I stood up to her that way. And why am I sharing this story with you? Because that kind of personality that wants to come in and make it all about them, right? They want it to be all about them in the sandbox. And it doesn't matter what you're working on. When you stand up to them and say, here's what I can do for you. No, I can't accommodate that, but here's what I can do. 9 times out of 10, they back off. And probably, they back off. And what is enlightening for them is someone actually stood up. See, people that behave that way in the workplace, rule of engagement, friend, people that throw sand don't really want to be the sand thrower. But it's something that comes from them that they don't have the emotional awareness to change the behavior because no one's confronted it. Everybody's just ignored it. And by the time they get into the adult world, we've just ignored the castle kicker kicking over projects because, well, it's just what they do. And you put teams of people around them. Do you know that managers spend like a third of their time on a weekly basis with one underperformer? And so that also equates to the bad behaviors on the team, because then you have the ripple effect of the other people that are trying to pick up the pieces. So have healthy rules of engagement is my point. Have healthy rules of engagement. So when those behaviors happen, your team is equipped to stand and confront the people. Even the Dora the Destroyer, which is the scariest one of all to confront because they're lethal to a team. And I will talk more about Dora in the future as I have been further developing her character in the sandbox to hang out with the Johnny, the Susie, the Nick, and the Harriet, because these are great individuals on your team. All of them have a place. but they're just like the little kid version when they go into that temper tantrum mode, or they're going to take all the tools because they don't feel important. Something else is going on, and your rules of engagement are in place to help expose that, but also help to make it safer on the team for people to engage in healthy manners. With healthy manners, what would that be like? All right, so I know that was a lot that I just threw at you, but y'all, understanding who you have on your team and what character they represent, who's the sand thrower, right? And then how do you address it? There's simple ways to address it. You're going to want to get the after action plan because I've got other ways to address each of the behaviors that you might be seeing in your workplace, and how to have those bold conversations with them as individuals so that you correct the behaviors. Because we will point to people that we have issues with, and we'll point to situations and circumstances that they're creating that we have issues with. And what we really need to be pointing to are what are the behaviors that we want to see changed. And when we have rules of engagement that are in place for our healthy team that we're wanting for the future, those behaviors become exposed and it makes people uncomfortable. And if you don't need to invite somebody out into another opportunity, they'll self-select themselves because they'll see they don't fit. They're being exposed and they don't know how to change that. They don't know how to operate often within the rules that you're putting in place. And it's not that you're trying to control. You just want it to be, you want the team to thrive. And I promise you, your team is not thriving when you have a Johnny the sand thrower, a Susie the shovel stealer, a Nick the castle kicker, a Harriet the hoarder, and certainly not a Dora the destroyer. When you have those personalities in the sandbox, that it's one thing to have the personality, it's the behaviors that they're exhibiting that are the key you want to see changed. And your rules of engagement help not only expose them, right? They actually help turn it around. They help to change it. They help to transform it, and they make it safe for everybody to speak up. And that's ultimately what teams want to do. We want to all have a voice to say, this behavior no longer serves us. So if not this, then what are we going to do? And you give them the framework to do that. And that's your job as a leader. Your job as a leader of your team is you get to help put that framework. But if you're someone who's listening today and you aren't the leader of the team, but you are a member of the team, and you absolutely know you have a Nick the castle kicker on your team, and it's making it very difficult to lead or very difficult to be a part of the team, then you want to have the tools to go about having that conversation. 2 things to do right away, friend. Share this episode with your leader to say, can we talk about some of the rules of engagement, and can we talk about the personalities of the behaviors of the sandbox and where we might have them and what we might do with that. Share that with the leader that can help you, but then also be willing to start having conversations about the behaviors. Identify the behavior you want to see changed. You can do that as a member of the team, whether you're leading the team, whether you're an up and coming leader, or whether you are brand new to the team. You can still help to identify what are the behaviors we want to change and how are we going to go about doing that with healthy rules of engagement so that we all are moving together in the same direction as a force together collectively. As I hit my microphone, collectively, not separate, not siloed. We want to break down silos. The way we break down silos, well, it takes having some really bold conversations about why they're there in the first place. And then what are we going to do about it? All right, friend. Thanks so much for joining me today in the sandbox. I hope that you're taking away some new tools, tips, and strategies for your next bold conversation to up-level yourself as a leader and to navigate the sandbox more effectively in the workplace. And head on over to tammyjbond.com/podcast. Click on this episode to download your after action plan, because there are going to be tools in there that you can apply for creating healthy rules of engagement, for identifying the behaviors in the sandbox that are not serving us, and to having conversations about how we can address those behaviors from those characters that we've been hanging out in the sandbox with. Thanks for joining me. Make it a great day.